So Governor Sununu has just arrived. He's getting settled in with Ms. Preston and getting ready for their presentation. And I guess we're here to welcome them.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Maria Danola, and I'm the proud principal of Hampstead Middle School. Please join me in welcoming the governor and our guest speaker, Kati Preston, and other invited guests. The Honorable Governor Sununu and Ms. Kati Preston on my right are surviving Holocaust survivor. Also joining us today are distinguished guests, Superintendent of Schools, Mr. Robert Thompson, Director of 21st Century Learning, Mrs. Nicole Tomaselli, Director of Student Services, Mrs. Tracy Griffinhagen, Hampstead School Board members, Mrs. Erin Pellegrini, Mr. David Smith, Assistant Principal, Mrs. Lynn Joseph, Hampstead Selectmen, Mrs. Lori Warnock, and Mr. Joe Guthrie, Rabbi Levy and Lori Medrick of the Etz Chaim Synagogue, and our longtime civic liaison, Dina Chatowitz. And we thank Dina for her continued guidance for our school and community service relative to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Thank you all for gracing us with your presence while we receive Ms. Preston's message of empathy, resilience, and acceptance. This opportunity was just a thought a month ago, and through the help of our civic leaders, our students, and our social studies, Ms. Katie Wolf, it has come to fruition. We could not be prouder and more excited to hear this message and bring it forward in our daily lives. At this time, I'd like to turn the program over to our student leaders, starting with James Caruso.
Good morning. Would you please rise and remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance, followed by the national anthem performed by Aislinn Sprague. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that HMS is very grateful to host the 82nd Governor of New Hampshire, who is currently serving his third term, Christopher T. Sununu, and it is a huge honor to welcome our Holocaust survivor, Kati Preston. Thank you so much for coming to tell your message and your story, and it is with great pleasure to welcome Governor Sununu to the podium.
All right. Guys excited? Yeah. I am. This is good. I'm really, really excited. So I'm just going to do have a few brief words and then introduce really the grandmother of honor today, as we were talking about earlier. This is making me feel very normal again. And it's been tough to talk about what is normal and getting back to normal. Over the last 2 years, it's been really, really hard on everybody, especially you guys. I mean, there's just no question about it. When we talk locally and nationally about who was really affected by COVID the most, everybody was affected, of course. You know, the fear of the virus, the shutdown, schools, what we're going to do, and the masking and the politics. I mean, could this have come at like a worse time, right, with the politics and everything of 2020? And it was a really, really brutal year. But now we're really coming through it in a really strong way. And so what we're doing now, and what we've kind of always been doing through the process, is looking at where the gaps are, where things just really got exacerbated in a negative way. And when you look at kids, and when you look at issues of mental health, and the anger, and the frustrations, and all of that, the triggering moments that everybody really has. Kati has been doing this dozens and dozens and dozens of times. Obviously, it slowed down quite a bit over the pandemic, but prior to the pandemic, I had the honor of doing a couple of these with her, and just coming out and just having conversations. It's not just about being talked to. That's not what this is about at all. But I love you could hear her story, and I've heard it many times. It's always something new. I always get something else out of it, and I always have 100 more questions that you want to ask. And I think that's the real opportunity we have here, not just, here's the presentation, we're going to talk at you, go back to class, you know, hopefully you remember it tomorrow. It's really about having a conversation. For me, I love getting the feedback, right? When kids are asking Kati questions or myself questions, getting that feedback. If I hear a question from you, it means it's probably pretty important to you, right? If you're going to have your one shot at a question and this is what you're going to ask, that's the priority. And sometimes in Concord, in politics and everything, there's a lot of talking, but to hear the questions can sometimes readjust our priorities. What's really happening in schools, what's really happening in families, what are the pressures that kids are really facing. The best way to do that isn't for a bunch of adults to talk about it, right? That doesn't make any sense. But to actually hear a little bit of the feedback. So this is making me, without a doubt, feel very normal again. One thing, I have 2 teenagers, and I have a 3rd grader. And by the way, teenagers are really, really hard. I'm trying. I'm not even that. I don't consider myself that at all. I'm still one of the youngest governors in the country, man. I was a teenager. I swear to God I was at one point. It's hard. There's a whole different dynamic that you guys, and a whole different level of pressures, and a whole different level of separation, if you will. And what we're talking about today, and hearing Kati's amazing story, when you're talking about people with hatred, you're talking about people with anger, you're talking about all these triggering things that get people at this really excited level. It's never really been like this before. And so we have all these societal things that are kind of pushing on this. COVID really exacerbated that, right? It took away a lot of our ability and the tools and mechanisms that we have to cope with challenges in our life. And it really added in a lot of things that can be cool tools, and without a doubt, you know, social media and Zoom and all the technology that we have, that's not going away. But I'll tell you, that's a big part of the problem. And so what the challenge is finding that balance. It's really about finding balance. I talk about social media a lot. Social media, I think, is like the bane of human existence, right? It's an awesome technology. It is great. But my generation, who effectively invented social media, we didn't have the maturity to understand the power of the technology. I still don't think we do. And the maturity to handle it. It can be a really, really useful, powerful tool. But when we use it for the wrong means, when we use it just to shout and to be angry and to polarize each other, it really separates us. So I guess this is my message of saying, my generation screwed it up. It's up to you guys to fix it. And I really mean that quite sincerely. You're the generation that is going to be growing up with all these new technologies. This is mainstream for you. And so in a way, there's hope that you guys are going to get it a lot better than we are. And you guys are going to take it to the next level in a more positive way, use it to kind of bring people together. It can be very separating, right? Social media is like New York City. You're in New York City, you're surrounded by 12 million people. You're like, wow, I'm part of this incredibly large, wonderful community. It's the loneliest place on earth, right? You're surrounded by 12 million people, but you're all alone. Same with social media. You're part of this giant community, but you're kind of all alone sometimes. And so I believe the antithesis of the empathy that we need to find, that connection, that connectivity, right? The antithesis of that is the disconnect. So connectivity is the key to everything. COVID made it really hard. Even when we were back in school, physically separated, whether it was at lunch or the mass or whatever it was, a lot of your activities were canceled, school sports leagues were canceled, right? That's the socialization, the connectivity you need to build those relationships, to stay positive, and to be able to understand how to work through really tough times. We've had tough times. There's going to be tough times again. You don't know what it is. I think today's a pretty great day. I know it's raining out. I think today's a pretty great day because we get to come together and we get to kind of rebuild and restart, I think, what is really important to build that connectivity. And that breaks down the silos. You can disagree. Disagreeing is fine. That's great. It's a good thing to disagree and have good debate. But you got to smile, and you got to be positive. And it can't be the blame game here and the blame game there. And let me tell you something. Stay out of politics, by the way. My gosh. There's another. We've all screwed that up, too. It really is brutal. You guys have huge opportunities. Anything you want to do, you can do. Now, you also have a lot of struggles. You have struggles, challenges, as a community, challenges as a generation, and challenges individually. And the worst thing is when you feel alone. And I get it. I really do. Being that alone feeling is there's nothing worse. But when you can find a connection with somebody, when you can find someone that maybe has some empathy and a shared experience, even at some level, is that a bridge? And that's what is really exciting. And that's why I'm like walking on air over the past few weeks, because it's those connective bridges, not just for your generation, but for all of us, that we have to rebuild. The best way to do it is to hear real stories, right? And to connect with someone who has really walked the walk and talked the talk and have those lived experiences. And that is why it is such an honor to be back here on stage, to be able to introduce someone who just has an amazing story, an amazing amount of energy, never has slowed down. Even when COVID came, she was like, I don't care. I want to go visit the kids. I want to go visit the kids. I want to go visit folks that can hear the story, and hopefully even if just a few people get something positive out of it, it's a huge win. So with that, I'm going to invite up my great friend, Kati Preston.
Thank you. Okay, let me get everything out here. Governor Sununu, it's wonderful to see you. We haven't seen each other since COVID. And the last time I saw you is when you signed the bill. Governor Sununu signed a bill that we sponsored to teach genocide and Holocaust studies in all the New Hampshire schools. And that was an incredible, incredible day for me, because I felt sitting there that generations of people from my past were looking over my shoulder. I was very proud. Okay, the reason that I come and speak is for several reasons. First of all, there's hardly anybody left alive from the time that this happened. And what happened to me was, I was not in a concentration camp. I was a hidden child, because there's very few people left who were in the camps. Most of them have died or they cannot speak anymore. But there's quite a few of us left, children who were hidden. And now more than ever, it's very relevant, because there are children now in Ukraine, children like me. I was 5 years old when the bombs were falling. And now when I listen to the television, I become a 5-year-old again. I feel the fear, I feel the anguish, I feel what those kids are feeling. And I wasn't aware how much I suppressed my own trauma. It really brought it out, and I can't tell you how involved I am in all this. The reason that I speak is because there's still a lot of hatred in the world. And that's one of the things that can destroy us. And by going out and speaking against hatred, I feel that I might contribute a little bit. If I can change 1 or 2 people in the audience, I'm successful, because they will go and talk to their children and so on. I come from a strange place. It's called Transylvania. You know where the vampires come from? Okay. There's no vampires, but the myth is for Transylvania. Somebody wrote a book about Vlad, who was a ruler there, who was a very cruel man, and somebody wrote this book about Dracula, and it became very famous. This place is a little enclave between Hungary and Romania that keeps changing hands. It's inhabited by Hungarians, Romanians, there are gypsies, or Roma as they call them, and there used to be a large Jewish community too, before they were all killed. And I come from the place where my persecution happened under the Hungarian rule, because the Hungarians sided with the Nazis and they started to persecute the Jews. I come from a strange family. My mother was Catholic and my father was Jewish, and they married, and that was such a big scandal because people didn't intermarry. Oh my God, they were disowned by both families promptly. But they didn't really care. They were very happy together for the short time that they had. And they were very well off. My mother had a dressmaking business with 40 girls who she employed. People used to bring cloth to a dressmaker to make a dress. You didn't buy dresses in a shop at those times. And she had 40 girls working for her, and she was very successful. People came from far and wide to have dresses made by her. And my father had a wholesale fish business. There was a river that went through the town, and he had great big crates of fish in the river, and he would wholesale them. And I remember as a little girl, there was always a carp swimming in our bath. We ate a lot of them. And I'd look at this carp, and it looked like an old peasant with long whiskers, and I would talk to it and say, look, I'm sorry we're going to eat you, but you're going to taste so good, trying to cheer it up. That was my way of coping with guilt. And I had a wonderful childhood. I was absolutely spoiled, you know. I had everything. I had beautiful toys and beautiful clothes, and my room was like the room of a princess. I had a bed that had silk and embroidery hanging everywhere. I had bookcases full of toys, every conceivable toy. I was totally spoiled, and they kept telling me how wonderful I am and how clever I am, and kept patting me on the head, and I truly believed that I was the center of the universe. And my parents were fairly secular. Although my mother converted to Judaism to please the Jewish family, she wasn't really doing very much, except Friday nights she would light a candle, and she would mutter something, cover her head and mutter something in a foreign language, and I thought she was doing magic or something. I wasn't sure. I was very small. I didn't quite understand. But that was the extent of her religiosity. But they always allowed me to have a Christmas tree, because Christmas was such fun. And I remember very tall Christmas trees, tall ceilings, and they would have little candles on the trees, and every Christmas we had a fire. Of course you have a fire if you light a candle on a fir tree. And I remember that lovely smell of burning trees. Christmas for me is that wonderful smell, but it was fun. I loved it. One day, one of the maids decided to take me to the local church to show me the nativity scene, and I stole baby Jesus. Stuck him under my coat, and I went home because the baby didn't have any clothes, and I wanted to dress it. Poor thing, you know, should have some clothes. Wanted to take it home and look after it. And my mother takes my coat off and she says, oh my God, they're going to say the Jews are stealing Jesus. Get back there at once and apologize. And I was dragged back, and there was this gentleman, the priest was very tall, and he had a nose like a toucan and long bony finger that he waved at me, telling me I was going to hell because I stole Jesus. And I never wanted to ever go near a church. I mean, that's one way to put somebody off. But I was terrified, and I was crying. And at this point, my parents decided that they had an out-of-control 4.5-year-old. Something had to be done. So they got me a governess. Boy, did they get me a governess. Fräulein, that means miss in German. She came, she was an Austrian lady with a bun on her head, and she had a mouth like a slash. She didn't seem to have any lips. She never smiled. She was so strict. And she terrorized me, and I kept telling my father, I don't like Fräulein, and he says, don't worry, darling, you have to like Fräulein because Fräulein knows best, and she's going to make a lady out of you, and if you want to be a lady from a good family, you have to have a governess. And she was a snob too. She wouldn't let me play with the local children anymore. I wasn't allowed to go and eat anything on the street, you know, and to this day, every time I'm out on the street, I eat. I'm rebelling. I'm 83 and I'm rebelling every day. She used to make me have hard-boiled eggs under my armpits so that I wouldn't flap my wings when I was eating, and no elbows on the table, of course. And, you know, and she also tied a string around my neck and around my waist with a ruler behind me so that my posture was good. But look, it worked. You see my posture? It worked. You know, it certainly did. And she was reading these dreadful stories. I'm sure some of you read those stories, which should be banned because I think it's child abuse. You know, the Grimm brothers and all the other stories about little children who get burned because they play with matches, and other little children who have their fingers cut off because their nails are too long. Horrible things. I think the Nazis' idea of child rearing was to scare the children into obedience. That was a sort of drive there. And she was awful, this woman. I'm not going to say a bad word about her, but you know what I mean, the B word. She really was. And if you know what the B word is, I can't spoil anybody, right? But, you know, and also when I was going for walks with her, my daddy gave me money and he said, listen, give it to the poor. And I said, well, how do I know they need it? And he says, you don't understand. If somebody's begging, you give them the money. Because those people are just like you. You are no better than any of them. And if somebody is there begging, it is your job to give it to them because you have the fortune of your parents having the money. And you're not better or different. But by luck, you happen to have money and they don't. And we used to have these, eventually the Jewish family forgave my parents, and we used to have these wonderful dinners, and there were 28 members in my Jewish family. And there was a table almost as long as this room, and they were all sitting around this table having dinner. And I was the youngest one, so I had all these cousins and aunts and uncles, and they were all telling me how wonderful I am, and my parents would show me off, say something in German, and I would stand up and recite something in German. I was very proud of myself because she did teach me to read, write, and speak German in a 6-month period, which was a big deal for a small child. And all these members of my family were doting on me and admiring how clever and wonderful I am, and I felt so loved. It was such a wonderful thing. All these people around me, they were all sort of looking after me, and you know, I'm the only one who's alive. They are all dead now. They were all killed. I was the only one who survived. And you know, people were saying, why did the Jews agree to go to concentration camp? Well, it wasn't like that. It didn't happen like that. It happened slowly. Slowly they took away our liberties. It started off by Jewish people weren't allowed to go to college. And then Jewish people weren't allowed to go to high school. And then Jewish children were only allowed to go to Jewish schools. Jewish doctors were not allowed to look after non-Jews. And the Hungarian authorities were very sneaky. They told all the Jews to come to the police station and register so they would know where you lived and how many people in each household, because they wanted to protect us, which was really not so, but everybody went to the police station like good citizens, and they all registered. And they knew where we were and what everybody was doing. And then they stopped having women under the age of 45 working for Jewish families. That was forbidden. And people started leaving. Some of my mother's workers left. Some of the young women who worked for us left. And somehow people started to go. And to my joy, Fräulein left. Oh, it was heaven. This woman was a hand-washing maniac. You think you washed your hands a lot recently. Nothing like what she did. Every 15 minutes I had to wash my hands. And when she left, I didn't wash my hands for 3 weeks. It was heaven. And to this day, every time I wash my hands, I think of this woman. I mean, that's why COVID was so strong. Oh, it was terrible. But anyway, she was gone, and I was very happy. I was sort of being a bit wild, and I enjoyed my life much more. And then I noticed that my parents were sad, and they would stop talking when I came into the room, and there was a general air of malaise, of fear. People were not happy, and my mother used to laugh a lot, was walking around with red eyes from crying, and I kept saying, "What's wrong?" And she'd say, "Oh no, don't worry, everything is fine, everything is fine." And at this point she came to me and she says, "I have a present for you." And she brought out this beautiful yellow star made of gold material, and she sewed it onto my coat. And I was so proud of that star. Little girls like shiny things, and I thought this was the most beautiful star in the world. And she said to me, "Let's go get some pastries." And I'm walking along the street holding her hand, skipping along, and a man comes opposite, and he stops and he looks at me. And I look up at him expecting a compliment, and he spits in my face, and the spit runs down my cheek onto my star. And I look up at my mother and I say, "He hates stars," not thinking that it's me he hated. And my mother, who normally would be such a protective person, takes me by the hand, shushes me, and starts dragging me home. And she says, "I'll tell you when we get home. Shh, come on, just come on, don't say anything, come." And I say, but she says, no, we'll talk at home. And when she gets me home, she tells me that the reason that he spat on me is not because of the star, it's because of me, because I'm a Jew and he hates me. So I said to her, "Well, if I didn't have the star on my coat, he wouldn't know I'm a Jew, would he?" She said, "No." "Well, can we take it off?" She says, "No, it's the law, you have to wear it." And for a small child, it was totally incomprehensible why I would have to wear something that people would spit on me for. And this is the first time that I experienced actual anti-Semitism personally, because I was protected from it. And I also noticed that, for instance, I wasn't allowed to go and sit on my favorite bench in the park, because that wasn't a Jew bench. They had a special Jew bench where Jews could sit. It was totally segregated. We weren't allowed to go to the swimming pool in case we contaminated it. And at this point, the authorities decided to make a ghetto. A ghetto is an Italian word. It comes from Venice. It means foundry. It was a metal foundry where the Venetian Jews were allowed to stay, where they were allowed to live there, and they had to be there at night. They couldn't leave during the night, only during the day. And it's still there. It's called Il Vecchio Ghetto, the old ghetto, and that's where the word comes from. Unfortunately, it's acquired terrible connotations everywhere. What the authorities did, they took an old part of town, a very run-down small part. They put a great big wall around it with barbed wire on top, and they started to round up the Jews. And I remember my father leaving. He was holding my mother. They were holding each other, sobbing. And, you know, I kind of wormed my way between them because I had to be part of everything. And I cried too because they were crying, but I wasn't worried. I thought Daddy would go on a business trip and come back and bring me presents like he always did. I loved my daddy. He was my hero. He was always happy, and he had this flamboyant white silk scarf, and he would throw me up in the air and catch me, and he had a big laugh. He was always happy. And this poor man was crying, holding my mother, and I remember him leaving with a little suitcase. I remember him leaving the house. And my mother decided at this point that she would not let me go to the ghetto, although My mother converted to Judaism. She was not considered a Jew by the Hungarians. They were considering people by race, not by religion. So because my mother didn't have Jewish blood, she would not have to go and die. But I would, because even if you had one Jewish grandparent, you were supposed to go to the ghetto. But she thought that nobody would notice one little girl missing, so she kept me at home. And I hated it because I wasn't allowed to go near the window, I wasn't allowed to go out, I wasn't even allowed to run inside the apartment because people would hear it. And I was utterly miserable. And at this point, a woman came to see my mother. We used to buy milk from a farmer. They would bring the milk in a cart with a big vat in the back of the cart. They didn't have supermarkets or special stores in those days. People bought things in markets and from farmers. And this young woman, she was a simple Christian girl. She was an orphan, and when she got married, my mother made her a wedding dress as a present, and she never forgot that. And when she heard that they're rounding up the Jews, she came upstairs and talked to my mother. She says, "Where is your child?" And my mother says, "I'm hiding her." She says, "No, give her to me, I'll take her with me to the country, she'll be safe there. There's nobody around, the neighbors won't see her, won't know, I'll take your little girl." And my mother very bravely handed me over to this woman, her only child, and off we went. And she told me that I was going to go to a farm. And I was very happy, thinking, wow, finally I'm going to be able to play outside, and there will be kids and puppies and kittens, and it's going to be fun. And off we go, and I hopped onto her cart, a little wooden bench. She sat next to me, and she even let me hold the reins part of the way, and we went for what seemed a long time. And we went for a very long time, and we got to her farm, which was on the side of a hill. Her house was up in the middle of the hill, and at the entrance, as you came in through the gate, there was a little barn with a stall for the horse, one for the cow, and the little barn, sort of an attic above it. They used to throw the hay up with a fork. They didn't have hay bales. And she gets me out of the cart, and she says, "You're staying here." I said, "What do you mean I'm staying? Why am I not going to your house?" She says, "You don't understand, dear. They want to kill you. You have to stay here." And I said to her, "Well, why would anybody want to kill me? I haven't done anything." She says, "You don't understand. People want to kill you. You have to hide. I have to hide you. You cannot come to my house." And she took me up into this dingy little attic on these rickety stairs, and it was getting dark, and there was a lot of rustling in the hay, and there were big black spiders everywhere, and I was crying. I said, "I don't want to stay here. I wanted my mommy and my daddy, and I wanted my room, and I hated it," and I was stomping my feet, telling her, "I hate it, I want to leave, I don't want to stay here." I was quite bratty, and she insisted that I had to stay there and kept telling me, "People want to kill you." And you know, the idea for a 5-year-old that somebody wants to kill you, I mean, let's face it, do any of you even think of death? I mean, I'm 83, and I think death happens to other people. I completely ignore it. If you ignore it, it won't happen to you. And I didn't understand this concept of somebody wanting to kill me, and I was just very upset about this. And I remember I spent the night crying, and I cried myself to sleep. And this woman, Elizabeth was her name, she was very kind. She would bring me food all the time. But I was totally alone in this attic, and I was only 5 years old, and I was scared. And there was all this rustling, there were mice, and eventually I started looking at these spiders, and they weren't bad. I didn't really want to know them too well, but I managed to catch one, and I tied a string on his leg, and I got myself a pet. But then the leg came off, and then I felt guilty. I felt really bad. But this is how I spent my time. I was in that attic for 3 whole months on my own without seeing another person other than Elizabeth, who would bring me food. And slowly I stopped crying. You know, you get used to things. I got used to being there, and I started to amuse myself by making little dolls out of the straw and playing with the spiders and trying to catch the mice, which I was never successful at. And I somehow amused myself and stayed in there. And she told me that if anybody came, I had to make myself very small and I had to stay very quiet because people want to kill me. So one morning, very early, I hear a commotion and I look through the cracks of the barn and there are 3 soldiers in green uniforms. They had black feathers in their hats and they're slapping this poor woman around and she's crying and she has blood coming out of her nose. And they kept saying, "Where's the Jew? We know you're hiding a Jew. Where's the Jew? Where are you hiding the Jew?" She says, "There's no Jew. Go look at my house." And they run up to her house and they look through the house and they get very angry because there's nobody there and they start throwing everything out of the window. They're wrecking her house, making a lot of noise. And then they leave and they come past the barn and one of them says, "Wait a minute. How about this barn? Maybe the Jew is in the barn." And they start coming up the stairs and they have big guns with bayonets fixed at the end and they're stomping up these stairs and I scooched under the eaves and I pulled the hay over me and I made myself very small and very quiet. But I was worried because my heart was beating so loudly I thought they would hear it. It sounded like a drum to me. And I shut my eyes really tight because I thought, well, if I don't see them, they won't see me either. And I was trembling and holding my breath. And then suddenly I open an eye and there's a huge black boot next to my face. And then the bayonet comes down, straight down for me, about 1 inch from my face, and it gets stuck in the wood. And then he pulls it out, and then they leave. And that's when I realized what it means to die. It means that somebody's going to stick a knife in your head. So I quite understood that and I stopped being a brat. I believed the woman. And I couldn't even stand up for a whole day. My legs were like water. She came to comfort me and I couldn't even talk. I was so frightened. And I never complained after that. I really believed her. I really believed that people would come and kill me. And that's when I realized that somebody wants me to die, you know, and it's a very scary thing because you think they're everywhere. Everybody's after you. And at this point, my mother was arrested because somebody realized that her child was not in the ghetto, and they tortured her, and she never told me what they did to her. But this woman, who was always a happy woman, never laughed after that. She would smile, but she would never really laugh anymore, and she never told me what they did to her. She said it was too humiliating. She didn't want me to know. And she managed to smuggle my father out of the ghetto. She bribed some people. She managed to get out of the prison, and she managed to bribe somebody to get my father to escape to Romania. He would walk to Romania to escape from the ghetto. And he told her that he wanted to come and say goodbye to me because I was so dependent on him. He wanted me to know that he loves me and that he really couldn't leave without telling me that he's going to come back, and it's the war and it's a matter of time until he was able to come back. And she kept telling him, "Please don't, it's dangerous." He says, no, I'm not leaving without saying goodbye to the child. And he walked to the farm overnight with a little bag on his back. And when he reached the gate of the farm, somebody was waiting for him, and they arrested him. And they took him away, and they deported him the next day to Auschwitz. And I never saw him again. And you know, to this day, I have a tremendous feeling of guilt, because if my father hadn't loved me so much, maybe he would have survived. Maybe he wouldn't have had such a bad ending. But you know, if your parents love you, they'll probably do anything for you, and there's nothing you can do to control the guilt. And I've often thought about that. I often think about you guys, how much I envy you, because you can go home today and you can slam a door and you can roll your eyes and you can say whatever to your father and argue, and you're so lucky to be able to do that. I never had that. I lost my father when I was 5. I never really knew that man. It was only the idea of him. But you are so lucky to have parents, to have fathers, to have families. You have no idea how fortunate you are. I feel fortunate today too, but I'll tell you later why. Anyhow, after this, my mother came to pick me up, and she was very happy. She said, the war started, and imagine being happy about the war. And she says, the Russians are coming, and they're going to be very nice, and they're going to liberate us, and the Jews will not be persecuted, and Daddy will come home. And she took me by the hand, and we left, and Elizabeth was waving at the end of her driveway with a white handkerchief, crying. And we went home to our apartment. I was very happy to be there, except there were bombs falling all the time. Every half hour or so, there was an air raid, and then the air raid would sound, and we'd have to go into the cellar. And then another sound would come to say we could come out again, and this went on up and down, into the cellar, out of the cellar. Eventually, we even stopped going to the cellar. We just watched the war from the window because there was not much you could do about it. And it was cold, and we had nothing to eat. There was no food. And there was no heat, no food, no electricity, just like Ukraine today. I keep thinking of these children. And I remember the feeling of hunger. You know, hunger is not like, oh, I haven't had lunch, I'm a bit hungry. No, it takes over your whole being. That's all you can think about. Your stomach hurts, your head hurts, your breath smells. You have a funny taste in your mouth, and all you can think about is food. You look in drawers to see if maybe a crumb or something fell there. Maybe somebody forgot a cookie. All you can think about is food, food, food. I mean, my mother found some potatoes in the basement, and she cooked those in all kinds of inventive ways, and that's sort of all we had. And they would pick mushrooms. They would go out in the fields and pick mushrooms between air raids, but there were bodies everywhere, so it was kind of scary. And my mother was a very brave woman, and she didn't want me to be scared. And I remember seeing dead bodies, and she would say, oh, let's have a game. You jump over that dead man. He's not going to bother you. So she made me jump over dead bodies so I wouldn't be scared, so that we could go and pick a few mushrooms. And that was our life at that point. And I remember looking out the window one day, and the horse and carriage were going in front of the house. And the horse dropped in front of the house, and the man came and kicked the horse, but the horse wouldn't move. And then he took the carriage away, and within minutes, doors were opening up, and people ran out with dishes and knives, and they started to dismantle this dead horse. And I remember as they pulled the hide off the horse, there was steam coming out because it was cold. And you know, we ate that horse. We even took the bones to make soup. And I love horses. I just lost my two baby horses that I raised from colts. They just died at age 29 and 30. I would never eat a horse. But then we did, because when you're hungry, it overtakes everything, and you eat anything you can. And we all ate this poor old horse. There was nothing left except the hide. Even the bones were taken away. And the Russians were coming across the river. The river was opposite our house, and we were watching this from the window. The embankment on one side, they came down that embankment, across the frozen river, up on this side, and they would be machine guns on this side, and they would kill them all. And they kept coming in waves, holding arms and singing. I'm sure they were drunk, because nobody's that brave to walk into machine gun fire. And they were singing and coming in waves and waves and waves, and the corpses built up so high we couldn't see the river anymore. And at one point, people stopped shooting, and we were under Russian occupation. Well, they were not warm and fuzzy like my mother said, not at all. They were pretty awful. They were very brutal, and they were killing people. And all the women in the area were hiding in my mother's double bathroom. We had a big bathroom, and she made a false wall, and they were all hiding in there, terrified. They couldn't go out because they would be killed or molested. And my mother at this point decided to take things into her hands and to go and talk to the local commander. Well, she couldn't go out. She was a pretty young woman, so she had to make herself look old. She took an old gray raggedy dress, and she put a pillow on her back under the dress an old scarf, and she put white chalk in her hair. She blackened her teeth, and she bent double with a cane, pretending to be a very old woman, and walked to the local commander's office. And to her surprise, the local commander was a young woman. By this time, the Russians lost so many people in the war that they were promoting young people and women to high positions. And this woman, through her interpreter, talked to my mother, and my mother said to her, "Listen, come to my house. I'm a dressmaker, and I'm going to make you look so pretty. That uniform does nothing for you, so I'm going to make you look pretty." So she came to our house, and my mother unhooked one of the drapes, and she put it on her, and she was very good at this, and within minutes she had a dress made for her. And the woman was delighted, and suddenly we had food. We had chickens, and we had butter and bread, and even a piece of chocolate. And everybody got ill, because when you suddenly eat after hunger, you get very ill. You have to do it gradually, but we didn't know that. And when you've been so hungry for so long, we were all gobbling up this food and getting sicker and sicker. It took a long time for us to realize that you have to do it slowly. But we were eating, but they could still not go out. So my mother asked for some guards. And they sent us 2 guards. One of them was called Ivan, very tall, very pretty blonde boy, can't have been more than 17. He was a captain. And he had a sidekick, an elderly gentleman, a heavy gentleman who was playing the accordion all the time. And these 2 were drunk all the time. They could drink anything. They drank my mother's cologne, they drank methylated spirits, they drank anything. But you know, there's 2 kinds of drunks. There's nasty drunks and there's nice drunks. These were happy drunks, and I loved them because I found them fun, you know. They taught me how to sing Russian songs and to do Russian dances. And you know, when they got bored, they would take pot shots at the moldings on the ceiling. And when it got too cold, they would burn our antique furniture in the stove. That was okay. I didn't care because it was a happy sort of thing. And I was enjoying myself. And one day, Ivan decided to bring my mother a gift. And the biggest gift for a Hungarian housewife would be a goose liver. It's a delicious thing. And he brought this goose liver, which still had a bit of blood on it. And having come from somewhere where they had no running water, he decided to wash it in the toilet. And he's washing this liver in the toilet, and it's not quite clean enough, so he pulls the chain. Pulls the chain, the liver goes away. He gets angry, he shoots the toilet. But he was nice. He was a nice guy. It was a bit odd, but nice. And one day I was ill, and he brought me a gift. And I remember it came in white, crinkly paper, and I opened it up, and it was like the rising sun. It was an orange. I had never seen an orange before. People didn't import fruit then. You ate what grew. And this orange was magical, and that wonderful scent. And then my mother opened it and gave me bits to eat. And then she candied the rest, and I was only allowed to eat the orange if I was ill, and I wanted to be ill so I could get the orange. It was heaven. You have no idea what an orange meant to a child who had been starving. And to this day, there's always an orange in my house. And actually, the governor here usually presents me with an orange. You don't have one today?
No, now I feel terrible.
Okay.
It's been 2 years. I always bring the orange, and I'm like, oh my God,
He forgot the orange, but he always gives me an orange. To me, an orange is life, you know, and security. And at this point, the soldiers left town and they went to a different garrison somewhere. And life started returning to semi-normal. My mother would barter, you know, for food. She would make garments for food, but she didn't have a lot of business then. But we managed to eat. She was always able to get enough food for us to eat. And at this point, she said to me, listen, there's a train coming back from the West. You see, by this time, we found out that the Jews had been to a concentration camp. All looked pretty, and I was so excited. I thought, wow, is Daddy going to recognize me now that I've grown so much, and is he going to be proud of me? I couldn't wait. And we went to the railway station and we're holding up this picture, asking people as they come out of the train, have you seen this man? 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 And slowly the train empties and Daddy is not on the train. And I start crying and my mother cries, and we go home holding hands, very, very sad. And then my mother, who's always an optimist, said, well, there'll be 2 more trains, he'll be on the next one. Don't worry, Daddy will come back. He's not going to leave us. So we go back the next day, and again we're holding up the picture, waiting for someone to recognize Daddy. And again, nobody heard of him. And my mother starts taking some of these people home. And these people scared me because you couldn't tell if they were men or women. They came off the train like ghosts. They were shuffling, they had no hair, they had sores, and they smelled bad, and they were in rags. And they were like ghosts. And my mother gathered them up and took them home and bathed them and looked after them and fed them and gave them clothes, her clothes to the women and my father's to the men. And I was hiding behind the sofa listening to the horror stories. And I'm not going to go into it because you guys will probably study about this much further. But let me tell you, it was terrible. And I heard all these stories and I was so frightened that something might have happened to my daddy. And I was very upset about this. And the 3rd day we go back, and again we're holding up the picture, and we're waiting, and the people come off the train, and a man comes to my mother and says, don't wait for him, he's dead. And she says, what do you mean he's dead? He says, I saw his body, he's dead, don't wait for him. And she says, well, who are you and how do you know who I am? And he says, don't you recognize me? He was a friend of our family where my parents used to go to his cafe casino every Sunday to play cards. But this man was in such bad shape she didn't recognize him. And he used to be a violin player too, and when they found out, they broke all his fingers and they never said them. So he had hands like claws, and he frightened me. And my mother took this man home to us, and he told her that he was going to go to his family's housekeeper because they left everything with the housekeeper. And he went and knocked on her door, and she opened the door wearing his wife's dress, looks him up and down, says, oh, well, you're alive, are you? Well, the Russians took everything. And she slams the door in his face, doesn't give him anything. And he comes back and he says, I have nothing. So my mother says, well, stay here for a while. And slowly over time, he started talking to us and telling us what happened. Him and his wife and child were deported together to Auschwitz. This is a picture of his little daughter. She was 11 years old. Her name was Dita. She was a very happy little girl. She played several musical instruments, good student, wanted to be an actress when she grew up. And this little girl and her family were taken to Auschwitz, and when they let out of the train, the mother and the daughter went to one side and the father to the other. And the father said to the guard, where are they going? And the guard pointed to a chimney that was spewing flames and smells. And he says, there. And at this point, the man didn't understand what it meant because we didn't know about this. We didn't know that they were going to gas them and burn them the next day. But this little girl was killed because she was a Jew. And she was no different from any of you sitting here. She had the same wants and desires and fears, just like you. But because she was a Jew, she was killed. And just put yourself in their place. If somebody came and just took you out of your home and took you away and wanted to kill you possibly because you have blue eyes or blonde hair, for no reason. And you know, this little girl has kind of obsessed me for many, many years. One of the 8th grades where I was speaking asked me for a picture, just to show you what a good generation you are. And the kids made a project, they called it the Dita Project. They printed her story on the back. They made 500 copies out of their own money and sent it to 500 middle schools. And they asked the middle schools to put it in the library. She says, we don't want to forget Dita by not remembering her. It was called the Dita Project. And that's the kind of thing your generation cares about. I'm very touched every time I go to a middle school and I see the picture there, I choke up. But slowly, out of two broken families, we cobbled together a new one, and the man became my stepfather. He was never my daddy, and I was never his daughter, but we had a very good relationship, and he was kind to me. And when I was about, I would say about 9 or maybe 10, he told me how my father died. He was with my father in the camp, and my father and another man from town stole a piece of bread, and they were caught. And the commander decided to make an example of them, so they took the two men, stripped them naked, it was cold, and beat them half to death with iron bars, and put each of them in a dog kennel in this big field where the Jews had to line up, the prisoners had to line up every morning to be counted. And it took my father 2 days and a night to die. And when I heard this, I became obsessed with revenge. All I wanted to do was kill someone. I wanted to torture the men who did this to my daddy. I wanted to invent the worst possible ways for people to die. I was quite sick. I mean, it's not normal for a child to be so full of hatred. And you know, it took me 50 years to stop hating. I don't hate anymore. I have no hatred in me. I don't forgive because I can't forgive somebody else's murder. If anybody kills me and my children forgive them, I'll haunt them. No way, you know. I can forgive anything that the people do to me, but I can't forgive for my father's murder. But I found that if my soul is full of hatred, there's no room for anything. So I sort of filled my soul with love instead. And I feel that that's the only way that I was able to survive. And I'm a very, very happy person, believe it or not. I'm really happy. And I have a wonderful, wonderful multicultural family. I have 4 sons. And every time I gave birth to one of my sons, I was giving the finger to Hitler. It was wonderful. And I kept thinking, right, I'm alive and you're dead. And I'm still alive and he's dead. And I'll live as long as I possibly can just to annoy him. But, you know, I'm very sorry about all the extinguished potential, about people like Dita, who will not be remembered once I'm dead and once the schools don't have the picture there anymore. Who will remember her? There's all these people, including my father. There's no markers. When you lose somebody now, you have a grave to go to. You have a closure. You have some kind of a ceremony. I have none of that. I don't know where to mourn him. I mourn him everywhere. I can't mourn him in any one specific place. And I miss having had this man in my life whom I never really knew. And, you know, I feel that I speak for the dead because they can't speak for themselves. And I speak for my father because he can't speak for himself. And I really, truly feel that 10% of human beings are wonderful people, and 10% are pretty awful, but 80% are sheep. It's the sheep who scare me. The sheep will follow the bully every time because it's easier, you know. If you follow the bully, all you have to do is stand there and giggle or do nothing. Whereas if you follow the good person, you might actually have to stand up for something. You might have to speak out. You might have to stop something. You might have to stop somebody bullying somebody. You can't follow the bully because it will corrupt you. And unfortunately, bullies are louder than the good people. You don't hear good people demonstrating. You hear bullies demonstrating. And you know, when I saw those Nazis marching in North Carolina, I was terrified because those people carrying the tiki torches were the same faces as carried real torches when I was a kid. I remember looking through the window, seeing the same faces Hatred has the same face in every generation. Hatred is universal, and it's very, very ugly and very scary. And, you know, there's always scapegoats. People have to scapegoat people. It's like when you walk down the street and you trip over a rock, you don't think, oh, I'm a clumsy idiot. You think, oh, they didn't fix the road, it's their fault. It's always somebody else's fault. And we always have to blame the other. Be careful not to other anybody, because you're all the same. I mean, let's face it, guys, who here is Native American? Nobody. Oh, yes, there is one. Okay, you guys can stay. The others all have to leave because we don't know if you came here illegally or not. We're all immigrants. We're all mutts. You're all like me. There's no such thing as a pure American other than a Native American, possibly, if there's any still left. But you must realize that we're all so similar. We're so similar. And prejudice and genocide is happening everywhere, even today. The thing that's happening in Syria, what's happening in Ukraine, a lot of African countries are still in turmoil. There's so much going on, but the only thing you can do is education, education, education. Because if you don't know the other, if he's strange to you, you're scared of him. And if you're scared of something, you hate him. And if you hate him, you persecute him. You have to reach out and know each other. Nobody is different from you. We all bleed exactly the same. We all hurt exactly the same. And you know, there was this wonderful man. He was the prosecutor at Nuremberg. They had a trial after the World War II, and they prosecuted some of the top Nazis and actually executed some of them. And the prosecutor there, who's still alive, he's 103 today, and he's still bright. He was saying at one of the lectures that when he was young, his immigrant father would sit him and his sister down and say to the two kids, "What have you done for humanity today?" They had to do something for humanity every day, even as small children. Pick up a piece of trash, feed a dog, help an old lady across the street. Every single one of you have immense power in your hands. Just look at the power of one person who saved me, saved my children, my grandchildren, and God knows how many generations thereafter, just by one good deed. And you don't have to have a great big deed. You can do small good deeds. You can go and sit next to that kid nobody wants to sit to at the lunch counter. You can be kind. You can just say a good word to somebody who's sad. You can open a door for an old person. You can carry something for someone. There's so much you can do, but your generation, and I agree with the governor, you guys are a much better generation, sorry, than yours. Sorry. I mean, you guys have a way, you can change this world. It is in your hands. I know it's a huge, huge task, but you have the tools. You have this tool, this phone. Don't leave your phones. That could save you because you can communicate with each other. You can let each other know what's happening. You won't be fooled like other people have been. And you can make all the difference. You can change your world. You can definitely do that. And I truly believe that your generation, I like to use the Hebrew word tikkun olam, which means mending the world. Don't destroy what's good, just mend it, you know. I don't believe in changing everything, just fix it. And you guys can do it. It's in your hands, because whatever you do now is going to be your future and your children's future and the world's future. You have so much to worry about. You have pollution, you have climate change, you have political turmoil, you have hatred to fight. You have so many fights, but you can do it, guys. You can do it. You can do it. And I'd just like to finish with a speech that I actually heard online. It was actually Churchill, who was the leader of the British during the bombing of World War II. And he was talking to the young people of Britain, and I'm just going to read it. "Hear these young men and women everywhere and proclaim it far and wide. The earth is yours and the fullness thereof. Be kind, but be fierce. You are needed now more than ever before. Take up the mantle of change, for this is your time. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. As you can see, I have no filter, so you can ask me anything you like, and I will answer you. Thank you. Yes, go ahead. Will you yell?
Hi, my name is Samantha Bell, and I was just wondering how you managed to rebuild yourself after so much trauma you went through, and now how you're sharing your amazing story with all of us.
Well, one of the reasons, what helps me is sharing the story, because every time I share my story and I get love back from you guys, which I do, I get letters and I get hugs and everything, it really helps me. I mean, it's a healing process. What happened though, there was one incident that happened that switched something for me. I was going home from school, I must have been 9, maybe 10, and you know, I was going to school. By this time it became Romanian. I was going to Romanian school, and all the kids used to pick on me. The Romanians hated me because I spoke Hungarian, the Hungarians because I spoke Romanian, and I was a smarty boots and I always knew the answers, so I must have been an obnoxious child. I had my hand up all the time. So I was going home with my 2 long braids, and one of the boys cut off one of my braids. And I was going up the road with my shorn braid in my hand, crying, and a man came opposite. Never saw him before or since. And he looked at me and he says, "Little girl, stop crying." And he said, "Go home, cut off the other braid, and do your hair up. You're going to look very nice, and it will grow back. But remember, if you give in, and if you cry, and if you let those people hurt you, you're going to become nasty and full of hatred. Love them. It will really annoy them. Love them." And you know, something switched. And I started to work on this hatred slowly. And yes, I did go home and I did cut off the other one, and it was okay. It was okay. But this man, I don't know who he was or where he came from, but I really do think he changed my life. And it was a slow process. It didn't happen overnight. I still work on it sometimes. I still sometimes hate someone. Then I decide to love them to death. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Would anyone else like to ask a question? Austin, come on up.
My name's Austin Cipriano. I just had a question. Why do you think people don't believe the Holocaust happened?
It's propaganda, if you like. You know, it's convenient for people to deny it, because when you do something really nasty and you say, "Oh, it didn't happen," some people will actually believe it. But it's the best documented genocide in the history of humankind. And unfortunately, people do forget. You know, the Armenians were murdered just after World War I in Turkey. 1.5 million Armenians were killed. Nobody knows about it because it wasn't documented. And somebody once asked Hitler, "Won't the world say anything if you kill all the Jews?" He says, "Who remembers the Armenians?" We have to remember so it doesn't happen again. It is propaganda.
Anthony, would you like to come up?
Hey, my name is Anthony Bonanno. I was just wondering, what is your life now that you survived the Holocaust? Like, what is your life like now?
What do I what?
What is your life like now that you survived the Holocaust?
It's wonderful. I live in America. I'm not persecuted. I can say nasty things to the governor and I won't be arrested. Not that I do, but I could. And it's wonderful. I honestly do think that this couldn't happen in America, because America is not tribal. Europe is tribal. Everybody's either Bulgarian or Hungarian or Romanian. Here we're such a mixture. There's no one race here, you know? And that's why I don't think you could get everybody to gang up on one particular race in this country. I really, truly believe that. And I also believe that the basic American is a good person. Even if some people are misled, they're still good people. And I truly believe in the future of this country. I came here from Europe. I'm neither a refugee nor an immigrant. I came here because I wanted to live in this big country. I brought my 4 sons here because there's more space here. And you know, when you put too many rats in a box, they eat each other. I'm not saying there's no rats, but the box is bigger. So, right?
Come on up. While we're waiting for him to come up.
I'm very happy that these kids are so open. It takes a longer time than this in high school to get them to talk.
Okay, I have 2 questions. So
Yes.
I'm Quinn Snyder, and my first question is, why do you tolerate your enemies instead of being against them?
Because it upsets them. It's my revenge. I use love as a weapon, if you like. I'm alive, I have children, I'm happy. And those who want to kill me are very upset about this. So that's one of the reasons. Also, it's a healthier thing to love than to hate, because it's better for you. You're a happier person, you're healthier. What's the other question?
My other question was when, after the Holocaust ended and you were able to live your life normally again with food and a home, how did you feel?
I was not really aware any one moment, you know, it was a gradual thing. Slowly we had food and we had this, but then things weren't good either because we lived under communism and that was horrible too. They were not very nice. And until we left the communist Romania when I was 11, it was a pretty awful place. You know, they would confiscate things. I remember one day they decided that our apartment was too big, so they stuck my parents, my step-grandmother, my cousin, myself, and the maid into one bedroom, and they took away the rest of the apartment, and they put other people in it. So we all lived in this one room, you know, because they decided that they needed more space for some of their special people. So it wasn't fun, but it was a slow, gradual thing, you know. Everything, nothing happens overnight, you know, it's a process.
Hi, my name is Brooklyn Ashford. Were there any local people in your community that became Nazi supporters?
Is there any community that has Nazi supporters?
No, was there anyone from your community that
Where I
became
live now?
Yeah.
Oh no. In fact, when I moved to my little village, I don't think they've even seen a Jew where I live. It's very small. Is that my? And I remember I called people together and I called my neighbors over and I said, guys, I want you to know I'm a Jew, and if that presents a problem, I will tear your heart out and eat it. I never had a problem after that. No problem.
Can I present to you a gift?
Sorry?
Can I give you a gift?
Oh my God, she's brought an orange. Yay, thank you. Thank you. Can I have a hug? I want a hug. An orange hug. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for speaking to our school.
Thank you. Yes.
Hi, my name is Sophia D'Ambrosio. This question says, have you ever gone back to where you were born or where you hid?
Would you?
Have you? Oh,
No, would you? No, I haven't. I want to remember my childhood as the golden childhood with sunshine. I want to remember it as it was, not what it's become. I don't want the bloodshed. I don't want to remember that. It's bad enough that it happened. I don't want to relive it. Not going back.
My name is Hadley Albert, and someone was wondering if you're in contact with any other Holocaust survivors.
I was, and I used to go to one of the things that we used to go every year to one of the schools in the area, and there was 5 of us, and now we're down to 3. There's still a few left, but unfortunately every year there's less of us. And we are in touch, but only just, there's not that many left. When you're 83, you tend to sort of be the last of the Mohicans, There's very few of us left.
Thank you.
Hello, my name's Eliana Henry, and I was just wondering if there was any other people that changed your perspective about your life or whatever.
Actually, several people. I had a couple of wonderful teachers. Believe it or not, if you have a good teacher, it can make a huge difference in your life. I had a couple of very good teachers. There was one teacher who would take me out of class and teach me art history in her spare time and literature because she felt that I needed more education. For no reason, she decided to do that. I had another teacher who would talk to me and tell me that it's all right to cry, because at first I couldn't, and she said it's all right to cry and you don't have to be ashamed. And she also taught me not to be ashamed of being different from other children. A lot of them were teachers, a lot of them. And I occasionally rub up against kind people. If you do find a kind person, hang on to them. It's precious.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so I just want to say 2 things. First of all, it's a question.
Yes.
The question is, what's your best advice to say to a person who's being very mean to you? What's your best advice on that?
To what to do with a person who's been mean to you?
Yeah.
Befriend them. Try to understand them.
Okay.
In fact, I want to go into the prison system and speak to white supremacists as soon as it opens up after COVID, because I want to understand why somebody hates me. It's almost like an education situation. I want to talk to them. I want to try and understand what damage happened to that person to make him hate. Because hatred, you're not born with hatred. You take a little kid, he's not born hating. You learn hatred.
All right, thank you. And the second thing I'd like to say is I just want to appreciate you for being so strong, and I know you've gone through a lot, and with all the trauma that you've been through and still being so kind and loving people, it's something that I totally admire and I appreciate so much.
Thank you.
And I absolutely adore that.
Thank you. Thank you, darling. Yes, absolutely. I'm so glad COVID is over. Thank you, beautiful. Thank you. Thank you so much. This is the first, actually the second time that I'm speaking with people without masks, and it's so nice to see lovely faces again, because before that it was like speaking to a room full of bank robbers. Everybody had a mask on. Go ahead, young man.
My name is Cooper Tupple, and I was just wondering what it felt like when you came back from hiding in the barn, if any one of your friends from school or...
Unfortunately, they were all gone. And the little boy I used to play with all the time, he was deported. He never came back. None of my friends came back. But I did meet one woman many, many years later in London. I was at a cocktail party, and I heard a woman speaking, and she sounded like me. And I went up to her, and I said, "Who are you?" And we started talking. It was another child who was in my kindergarten who survived. There was 52 of us, only 2 of us survived. And it was such a wonderful, wonderful experience to hold this woman who actually made it out.
Thank you.
I'm just going to ask the folks if you guys could step back a little bit because we're getting some feedback on the microphone. If you could go back just a little bit for me there. Thank you. Okay.
My name's Ian Edelstein, and I was wondering what it was like for you to go back and have your friends not be in the same town that they were.
It's shocking. It's very shocking. It is very lonely. You feel that you're alone. Just like I now feel a bit alone because everybody's dead, most of the people in my life, the only people that I have in my life are people, my children, and they're my future, not my past. But my past is pretty much gone, because that's what happens when you're old as well. It's sad and happy at the same time. I'm happy to be here, but I wish the others were here too. Thank you.
Hi, my name is David Gardner, and I'm wondering, to this day, do you still have flashbacks of the Holocaust during the time you were in the barn and stuff?
Interesting you should say that. I love going in my barn and smelling hay. It gives me a feeling of security. And the only flashback, the really bad one I had when I was talking at the World War II Museum in Wolfboro, and during the recess I went out and looked at their exhibits, and there was a big bayonet in one of the glass cases. And I was hyperventilating. I had to go into the bathroom and compose myself. That's the only time I had a real bad flashback. I somehow managed to control it most of the time.
Thank you.
I'm going to pause on the 7th grade questions for a moment to see if any of our 8th graders have any other questions that they would like to ask.
Is it okay if I sit down?
Oh, absolutely.
It's getting a bit heavy.
Sam, would you want to come up?
Thank you. Thank you so much. By the way, this is not vodka. Should be, but it isn't. Thank you. Thank you so much.
There we go.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Samuel Kane, and I have 2 questions.
Sure.
My first question being is, how did you first meet Governor Sununu?
How did we first meet?
In a synagogue. Believe it or not, that's where we met, yes. I was speaking at a synagogue, and the governor was there, and people said, well, would you like to speak to anybody? And I said I would like the governor to come up and give me a kiss. And he did, and we become very good friends.
That's nice. And also my second question being, if my principal allows it, could I go take a selfie with you two?
Selfie. Of course you can. Yeah, we'll do it afterwards.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Fallon Roy, and I was just wondering, well, I have 2 questions. One is, like, how many people, like, obviously you're not going to know this for sure, but how many families would you say have lived with you, like, over all the years? Like, all the families that your mom, like, kind of brought in, or people?
How many people my mother?
Like, yeah, brought into your house.
I would say 30, 40 people, thereabouts.
And then also, like, did you have any specific encounters with, like, the Nazis or anything, or, like, the police?
No, I never have, actually. It took me a long time, for instance, to be able to go to Germany, because when I was much younger, every time I saw a middle-aged German, I thought, I wonder if you killed my father. But there are people just like you, this generation, my generation, they're all the same. I mean, even the kids in Ukraine, they all listen to the same music, look at the same things. They're so much like you, so much like me. You're all pretty much the same. No, I have not encountered them. Also, they don't tend to nowadays they come out of the woodwork, but before that they were a bit ashamed of hating us.
Okay, thank you.
Are we doing okay for time? Can we take a few more questions, or are we at the take a few more? Awesome.
Hi, my name's Matthew Talbot, and I was wondering, how long ago did you move to New Hampshire? And of all places, why New Hampshire?
Well, I'll tell you why. I came to America because my husband at the time had an offer he couldn't refuse for a job, and we moved to New Jersey, which sorry, anybody here from New Jersey, I didn't like it. And I wanted to live somewhere near the sea, near the mountains, not too far from an international airport, and where I could afford to buy 50 acres, because I feel that land is security. And so we picked New Hampshire, and I'm very glad. That was 40 years ago, long time. Never lived that long anywhere.
Did you say you're going to New Jersey tomorrow?
Yeah, he's going to New Jersey tomorrow.
Hi, I'm Tori Valente. I just want to say I'm very admirable about how confident you are. I just want to know where'd you get all your confidence and to tell your story?
Where do I go to tell my story?
No, where'd you get your
My
confidence?
confidence. I don't know. I don't know. I always had confidence because when I was very young, I wanted to go on the stage. You know, I like being on stage. I really do. And also, I love people. And the minute you love people, they love you back. So you have an advantage when you go into a room full of kids like you. I'm not afraid of teenagers, by the way. I don't have any now. I think teenagers are wonderful because there's this half devil, half angel in you. It's wonderful. Thank you.
Hey, second thing, sorry. I just wanted to say thank you so much for telling your story. My grandpa knows that I was going to be here today just to hear your story. So very happy to hear it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I have a bit of a strange question.
Go ahead.
Why do people think the Holocaust is a joke, and what would you say to those people?
Well, you know, we all make jokes. I mean, I was driving an ambulance for a number of years when I first came here. And I remember in the ambulance, all of us making horrible jokes, you know, about the very things that we were doing, because it's one way to perhaps deal with it. You know, it's so horrible that if you make a joke, it's easier to handle it. And people make jokes about everything. I mean, you know, they make Irish jokes and Polish jokes and Jewish jokes and this and that. We all make jokes. But I think it's partly to be able to not be afraid of something. And I don't think most of the people do it out of malice. I think they do it out of ignorance. Because once you're educated, you don't do that.
Do you think it's possible that one day we'll all forgive those who did these horrible things?
I don't think forgiving is what we need to do. We need to be aware of it. We need to make sure it doesn't happen again. Forgiving, you know, if forgiving would bring back one person, I would forgive tomorrow. But you can't forgive or forget what happened. But you have to make sure it doesn't happen again. And knowing about it, being educated about it, is one way to stop it.
Thank you.
We're just going to take 2 questions more.
My name is Kaden Morse, and I was wondering if you have any nightmares that relate to the Holocaust?
Not really, but since this thing in Ukraine, I wake up and I hear sirens. I think there's an air raid, and I wake up, turn the light on, I realize, oh, thank God I'm in New Hampshire. That's the only one that really affects me. But I've managed to pretty much, remember, I've been living a long time, so I was able to compartmentalize things pretty well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
I'm Cameron DeCesar. If you could go back to the past, to your 5-year-old self, what would you tell them? If you were not, now.
If I was 5 years old now?
If you could go back to the past from now, what would you tell your 5-year-old self?
That it will be okay. That you can get over it. Don't become a victim, become a survivor. Don't ever become a victim.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Thank you so much for
Thank
answering
you.
their questions. Really appreciate it. Would you like to ask a question?
Kati and Governor Sununu, this is a question, I guess, for both of you. Kati, you talked about when you were a child and people in your village started hating Jews for no apparent reason, and yet they ended up growing to be the armies that oppressed and killed. We are seeing in our day and time the growth of white supremacist groups, the growth of incidents of anti-Semitism. What can we do, and I would offer to both, what can these young people do to, as you said, make sure it doesn't happen again here and now. You talk about how wonderful it is to live here in New Hampshire. We've been here for almost 8 years. We're very happy here as well. What can these young people do to prevent this seed of anti-Semitism from blossoming into hate and death?
I think awareness is the main thing. You must be aware that this is going on, and you must be educated enough to know that it is nonsense, that you cannot hate somebody for being slightly different or having a different religion. And you have to reach out to people. Try and meet a Jew if you don't know one. And you'll realize that we're pretty human, you know. And we're not all rich. Here's one poor Jew sitting. So, you know, all these myths, all these gossiping myths, they don't happen. Just reach out to people and be aware and be educated.
I would only add that you don't beat extremism with extremism. You don't. I mean, if the other side is really extreme, you're not gonna. I'm gonna be more extreme on this side, and I'm gonna win the day. That's the 5% over there and the 5% over there over religion or politics, whatever the issue might be. And like you said, awareness is education, right? It all has to be talked about. It all has to be taught in schools. I mean, we signed the bill. I thought it was a no-brainer. A bill that we're gonna make sure that all kids are taught about the Holocaust in school. Well, of course, that's an absolute no-brainer. But the fact that isn't done everywhere, I think that was the most shocking piece. And it's not just about anti-Semitism. It's on issues of race, gender identity, politics. My goodness, now I mean, it's not about othering people, right? It's about the most fascinating part I find of Kati is it's a very unique message. It's not really even about forgiveness. It's about understanding. And there's a difference between forgiveness and understanding, and what forgiveness is. That's a very personal thing to forgive. But understanding is something that can be very universal and that we can give to somebody else with the education and that lived experience. And you got to keep talking about it. When you stop talking about it, the conversation ends and the extremes get the microphone. Don't let the extremes get the microphone. And again, collectively, we all have that responsibility to be part of that. And isn't she the best? She's the best. Cannot thank you enough. You're the best.
Thank you. Can you help me get up? Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. This was really wonderful. This is a very loving school. Are they all nice to each other? Angels, every one of them. Okay, wonderful. They wanted selfies. Okay.
Good morning, Mrs. Preston and Governor Sununu. My name is Trainer Mayu, and on behalf of my school community, I thank you for coming to our school to share such a message of hope, respect, and resilience. Mrs. Preston, your personal story certainly inspires us to stand up to hate and discrimination in our school, state, nation, and world. It is vital for young people like us to learn about the Holocaust and your story of hope and survival as students. We have the power in our hands to build a welcoming and respectful community which embraces diversity, equity, and inclusion. Ms. Preston, we assure you that your time today with Hampstead Middle School students has made a lasting impression, and we will share your story to our families and friends. I know after hearing your life story that you have left an indelible mark which has inspired me and all of us to make positive change in our world. As hopeful, empowered, and empathetic youth, we have the responsibility to stand for justice and righteousness. Finally, as a gesture of appreciation, we'll be making a donation to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C., and we will always remember Ms. Kati Preston. Thank you.
Thank you. Wow. Wow. Thank you. Oh, my goodness. Thank you very much. Look at the beautiful flowers. Governor Sununu, I feel bad you didn't get any flowers.
I'm okay. I'm okay.
Thank you. That's wonderful.
Okay, sure.
Thank you very, very much. I believe today's experience was something that we hoped would be, planned for it to be, and it was. Thank you very much, Hawks. Thank you, distinguished guests. Thank you for sharing in Miss Preston's message, and that is the standard for us going through our day, each and every day, through this life together. Thank you, and thank you.
Thank you.
I think we're going to have the 7th graders go back with their teachers, and any of the people for the photo ops will stay behind.
My orange. I'm not leaving my orange. This is wonderful. Oh, they got it.
Oh, here, we'll do this. We can